G'day, battlers, and today we're jumping in for another brand new Go Battle League meta. This time, the Single Type Cup, which is a cup so simple it should be able to explain itself in the title. It is Pokemon that only have a single typing, so it actually gives an example in the text. So Wobbuffet, who only has the Psychic typing, is allowed, whereas something like Swampert that has the Water and the Ground typing is not allowed. Only one typing. And there are two bans for this meta, so Cresselia and Defense Deoxys are both banned from this meta. They would be quite powerful, as you'll probably be able to get a vibe for once we get to the main graphic. But the other big thing to keep in mind is that this cup is actually a bit weird, a bit different to other themed cups, because it's actually going to be running for 2 weeks, whereas most of the time we've had like Great League runs for 2 weeks, and in each of the 2 weeks there's a different themed meta, or something special. This time, Single Type Cup is going to be running all the way from June 23rd right through July 7th. So 2 weeks, the first week that has Ultra League, and then the second week will have Master League Premier. But big important notice alert, the second week is going to have triple Stardust. So every battle you do in week 2 is sort of 3 times as important Stardust wise as the first one. Elo wise it's the same, but if you sort of need dust, this week 2 is going to be the one to prioritize if you need to sort of plan out your time, that sort of thing. Definitely week 2 big. Maybe you use week 1 to sort of experiment a lot more, and then week 2 you just sort of go ham and try and reap in as much dust as possible. That's sort of up to you, but yeah, in a nutshell, that's sort of what it is. So let's jump into the main meta simplified infographic and take a look at what we've got. But before we do that, do go ahead and subscribe, because plenty more Go Battle League meta simplifieds in the future. But hiya for the thumbnail. Now we've got 5-man groups on the graphic, and then we have some more Pokemon down here. This is not because they are worse. Some of them are quite high rated on PvPoke. So we'll talk about it all in good time. But the main graphic, we have 5 main groups, and if you have taken a look at the PvPoke rankings, you should not be surprised at what is right dead bang in the middle, which is a whole lot of fighting types. They are dominating the top of the PvPoke rankings, and so they are sort of the Pokemon to beat. So in the fighting group, we have Machoke, Machamp, Sirfetch'd, Vigoroth, and Dubwool. There's definitely more Pokemon that fit into this grouping. So there's more options. These are just sort of a selection of some of the best in the fighting group. And so it sort of becomes a question. I think we'll go, usually I'd introduced all 5 groups, but I think instead we'll sort of just follow it around. So if we start with the fighters, we have to think about how we beat the fighters. And there's two main ways to do that. The first way being using fairy types. So in the top left-hand corner, we have 3 fairy types in Granbull, Clefable, and Florges. There are actually a lot of them in this meta, so you've got a lot of options. Sylveon, for example, is pure fairy. So you can sort of plug and play with a lot of different fairy types, some Charmers, some Fairy Winders, but they are all going to do quite well against those fighting types because they are going to resist counter, and they're generally going to be doing super effective damage to all of these guys except for Dubwool, who doesn't actually have the fighting typing. But generally they do pretty well against Dubwool just because of the raw damage as well. But then there's the question of sort of what protects the fighters from the fairies, and that is the poison types in the bottom left-hand corner with the Grimer, the Muck, and the Nidorina. And it's sort of like, it's very obvious that matchup. I have drawn an arrow from the fighters to the poison types. Generally, poison types actually do pretty well against fighters, but some of these, like a decent chunk of these matchups actually do go in the fighters' favor. And part of that is just things like, Vigoroth with its pure normal typing, being able to get up to bulldozers here or there. So a little bit sim hero action, but just other things like, Sirfetch'd being able to get to hits really quickly, like a Night Slash really does add up. Plus, there's always that potential for the boost. But just like, sort of take that with a grain of salt, because the poison types do actually do generally quite decent up against those fighters, which is why the big major counter to the poison types, which is also the other counter to the fighters, is the bottom right hand corner with the Hypno and the Cofagrigus. So Hypno with its big confusion damage, going to be doing super effective to the poisons, but then also going to be doing super effective to the fighters, not including the normal types in Dubwool and Vigoroth, but again, going to be resisting the counter damage. So generally going to do really well there. And Cofagrigus, also a Pokemon that is resisting the fighting damage, while generally sort of being able to add it up. It is a bit of an awkward spot because the normal types also resist its ghost damage. So I think Cofagrigus, like I've kind of just put it here for good measure. Hypno is really the way to go if you're going to bring one of them. But if you don't have a Hypno, then Cofagrigus could be something to consider. I wouldn't really recommend Cofagrigus over Hypno, especially because Hypno has that sort of Swiss Army knife ability where the opponent doesn't know what charge moves you're running, and everything has to be just a little bit scared because they don't know what moves it is. So Hypno, a very powerful mon in that regard, and really just able to overpower. There is some fight back from Surfetch'd who has that Night Slash, but Surfetch'd is really squishy, so it actually loses pretty quickly. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of confusions before Surfetch'd is down. So, like, it's got some playback, and there's definitely going to be some circumstances where you have enough energy to really just destroy that Hypno, but generally Hypno going to be able to take that one out. And then sort of the other side of the coin is, how do you counter Hypno? And the big major answer, other than Cofagrigus, is Umbreon. Umbreon being that pure dark typing, and actually like the only real like useful, viable, pure dark type Pokemon in this meta, which makes Umbreon really, really valuable to take down the Hypno and the Cofagrigus, while also having the option to either go with the Last Resort or the Psychic. I kind of like Psychic because fighters are going to be so big, poison types are going to be so big, that having that Psychic type damage could be really key to winning some matchups that you might otherwise lose. So personally, I'm a little bit on Team Psychic as opposed to Team Last Resort, so I would run Foul Play Psychic personally. You've also got some other options in Lickitung, also doing some Ghost super effective damage there, while resisting the Ghost type damage from Cofagrigus. Doesn't resist it from Hypno, but still just really bulky and sort of able to push through. And then Registeel, also another option that is a bit of a weird one. It's not doing like big super effective damage, but it sort of like is able to win, especially against Hypno. It does depend on the Hypno moveset a little bit, but generally fits in this group where these three are also going to be losing to those fighters. But Umbreon, while it is a really, really big pick, countering down that Hypno and then also having that playback with the Psychic against the fighters and the poison types, it does lose really, really, really hard against the fairies. So that sort of just, again, raises up the fairy stocks a little bit, which makes you think a little bit more about the poison types. So you can sort of see that there's a little bit of a dynamic situation going on in the meta where, like, the different groups are coming up to fight each other. So as much as when the meta was released, I was kind of like as worried as everyone when there was all like fighters up in the top ranks of PvPoke, but I think that there is actually going to be quite a decent bit of counterplay. It is weird having single typings because usually so many complex matchups are developed because of like Pokemon like Trevenant have really interesting matchups because of the dual typing of the Ghost and the Grass. But without any of that, it's all very plain and simple. And maybe this is actually a really good cup to learn your typings. But before we get too rambly, let's talk about these Pokemon that are down here. Starting in the bottom right-hand corner, we have two Dragon types, Haxorus and Dragonair. Haxorus has access to counter and fits in really well with the other fighting types, but I've separated it out because it is a little bit different. The thing about dragons, and this goes for Haxorus and Dragonair, is the same thing that I say about dragons in every single Meta Simplified video, that they're eligible. Say it with me, they do really good neutral damage against everything. Everything except the steel types, which there's really only Registeel, and then the fairy types, which there are a decent chunk of. The dragons are able to do big neutral damage across everything, can pressure shields, and resist a lot of sort of basic charge moves as well. They resist fire, water, grass, and electric. Not that there's like a ton of that sort of stuff, but there's some stuff like Hypno's elemental punches. So just sort of classic Pokemon in there. Wobbuffet is also very highly rated, and it's a bit of an interesting spot where you could run Charm, you could run Counter, you could run Splash. I don't think I've seen anyone ever use Splash because there is never any reason to use Splash. But if you want to use Splash and get some win, I'm in my head, I'm kind of like, oh, there could be a YouTube short in there, but there's nothing short about Wobbuffet battles, especially if it has Splash. So, probably don't use that, but you've got like Counter and Charm are both really big moves in this meta. So you might see Wobbuffets running both moves, and obviously really, really bulky, maybe some timeout strats. Maybe you go like super bulk with Wobbuffet, Hypno, and Registeel and just wall out everything, or throw in an Umbreon for the really like foul play spam as well. There's definitely going to be some timing out. A more interesting pick is Lurantis. Lurantis is something that I'm really interested in. Obviously there's some big shiny opportunities at the moment if you're sort of into that. But I think it's a sort of a bit of a neutral pick. And sort of pairs up with Pinsir as well, actually, because Pinsir running, I think Pinsir's got Superpower. or no, it's got close combat. So Pinsir with close combat, again, fighting moves, so it does big damage to, Umbreon, Registeel, Lickitung, as well as the normal types in Vigoroth and Double. The bug typing gives you some big play up against the Hypno, with that pure psychic typing as well. So it's sort of an interesting pick that I think could work really well, but it is a little bit one of those like high risk, high reward Pokemon where you can get really demolished because it's a little bit squishy. But yeah, I'm sort of rambling here, but I hope that I've sort of painted a little bit of a picture as to what this single type cup might look like. Just give you a basic overview so that as we head into these 2 weeks, we've sort of got a better idea about what to expect. And again, it goes for 2 weeks. So the first week can be a little bit of a learning exercise. And then as we go into that second week, rein in that big triple Stardust rewards. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for future Go Battle League Meta Simplifieds as well as, of course, other content that will be coming down the pipeline. Some announcements very soon. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff to come. But with that said, thank you also to my patrons and YouTube members as well for being some very lovely human beings. And yeah, I will see you in the next video, whatever it may be. I don't know yet, but we'll find out together. Bye.